Hi, I'm Katie Trzaska-Miller, and welcome to the Max Loves Midland Show.
Welcome back to the Max Loves Midland Show. I'm your weekly tour guide, Kevin LeDuc, and with me today is the Michigan maven herself, Miss Katie, pure Michigan Trzaska-Miller. So, Katie, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Now, I gave you a couple titles in that quick little intro, but you hold so many more titles than that one, and I was so excited to have you on the show today because as I learn more about you and have more conversation with you, I think you have knowledge in such a wide scope and like a really, really cool career journey, and we are so lucky to have you here in Midland. But I want to know, what are some of those hats that you currently wear?
Oh gosh, well, I'm a full-time employee, of course, so I work at the Midland Area Community Foundation. I am a parent, so I'm a mom. I'm a human mom and a dog mom, so I'm always busy, running my household. And then I spend a lot of time doing a lot of things around town, so I do a lot of volunteering. So we'll get into, I'm sure, like I'm an arts administrator by trade, so I sit on a bunch of boards for different arts organizations. So I am the immediate past president of the Michigan Presenters Network, which is a consortium of arts presenters from around the country, or around the state, rather. I've been on that board for 8 years. It's a long time commitment. I'm currently rolling off the board of the Cultural Advocacy Network of the state of Michigan. And then here in Midland, I am the logistics chair for the annual Juneteenth block party. So I was one of the founding members of that committee and have been running that event for a few years now. I'm also on the board of the Midland County Inclusion Alliance, which is a group that works to make Midland a more welcoming and inclusive and thriving place for everybody here in Midland County and beyond. And because of that, I also liaison to the Cultural Awareness Coalition, so I'm really involved with CAC programming as well. And then one of the other things I do is I'm on the board. I'm one of the founders of the Spark Artistic Mentorship Program, which is a scholarship program that provides funding for professional artistic training for middle school and high school students of color in the region. So we provide scholarships and mentorship to students that are thinking about potentially pursuing a professional arts career down the line after high school. So that looks like not only scholarships for training with professionals across the country, but also mentorship in terms of like auditions and college and how does the industry run, things like that. So I run that with some of my friends and colleagues from around the area too.
It's absolutely incredible, and I hope everyone out here that can either watching or listening, that they'll remember all these things. There is a quiz at the end of this show today. It's an impressive resume, and where do you find the time to do all of this stuff?
I don't sleep. That's where I find the time.
Like I said, we are so fortunate to have you in Midland. I think the intersection of your career when it comes to art and political science and just really all over the board, philanthropy, community involvement, it is very cool, and it feels like every conversation we have, it brings out another new authentic thing that you've been involved with and just helped to bring to life. And I think it's great that, you and I have a lot in common from both being in media and in these spaces, but I feel like we've been on such opposite ends of these spaces that I really am fortunate to learn a ton from you. So I'm excited to have you on today, and I think you have a really interesting career journey and how you've actually ended up in Midland. You're not a native Midlander.
I am not. I'm a transplant.
And as much as I would love to hate on you for being a Packers fan, you actually had roots in Green Bay at one point in time.
I did,
which goes against like some of my morals of if you're from a place, you got to support it. So we'll let you slide on that one even today. So it'll be a pretty easy conversation. We'll have a fun time today. But
sounds good.
But I don't want to start with you here in Midland. I think that'd be really easy to talk about your work with the Midland Center for the Arts and now working at the Midland Area Community Foundation. And then obviously through all of those things you just rattled off that you're working on both locally, but also regionally, nationally, and really across the board. And you're also host of a podcast.
Yes.
And it's got over 100 episodes, and one day we hope to be there. So you are just kind of involved in a little bit of everything. So how does one end up in this young professional space in Midland with such a resume like yours, which goes so deeply? So I'm curious, like, where are you actually from?
I'm originally from the East Coast, so I grew up in Western Massachusetts, and I moved to Michigan when I was turning 11 years old. So with my mom and my dad and my brother, and we ended up in Muskegon due to my dad's job. And I was actually a really great place to grow up, and I quickly grew to love being from Michigan. I love where I'm from in Western Massachusetts, but Michigan is just special, and it was pretty evident, like growing up in Muskegon, not only do you have the natural beauty of the state and all the natural resources that it has to offer, but the state is so culturally rich and artistically rich. And growing up in Muskegon, there was all sorts of opportunities through my school and through local community programs and organizations to engage in the arts. So that's really, I started dancing when I was 3 years old, like was really into dance, but I was able to take theater classes and do tons of performing and learn from incredible artists themselves in that region. And so that really like cemented my love for Michigan. And I did move away for college. I went to St. Norbert College in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where I studied political science, communications, and theater studies because that's what I do. I'm a little bit of an overachiever. And I have family in Milwaukee. So my Packers affiliation started before Green Bay. But being in school in Green Bay, the Packers actually do their summer training camp on my college campus. So it's sort of hard not to like just be, totally engaged with the Packers and the Packers lifestyle. And basically Sundays on campus would just...
Packers lifestyle. Get out of here. Anyways, continue.
I mean, campus would just shut down on Sundays for games. Like there would be nothing happening during football season.
Well, they've ran like specials, even like there's been commercials on NFL Network about Green Bay on Sundays and just how it just completely shuts down. And my mom lives in the Upper Peninsula, and so my brother, when he got married, we had his bachelor party in Wisconsin. So we drove through Green Bay. He's also a Packers fan. So we went through Green Bay, and I just couldn't believe, like, everything really is just green and yellow.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much civic pride around having the team there because it's the only publicly owned NFL football team, right? So people can buy shares of the team and own it. So I think that really contributes to the passion people have for the team and the sense of ownership they have. And they're incredible with the community. The players, the team, they're always out doing stuff, making appearances, helping out. It's a great place actually to go to school and to live. So,
absolutely.
But yeah, so after I was in school in Green Bay, I came back to Michigan and it was like during the recession in 2008, 2009. It was really tough. So I did a couple of things. I moved out to Washington, D.C. for a while, did some political science stuff, came back and was working for a nonprofit and it was like a job I really hated. It was just not for me, which is okay. Sometimes you have to do those things when you're young. I was at a community event downtown, actually at the Muskegon Area Community Foundation, which I had affiliation with already. I was at sort of like their version of Give Local, but like an in-person version of it. And I ran into an old director friend of mine, Kirk Wahamaki, and he was like, hey, what are you up to this summer? And I was like, I just moved back, like figuring it out. He said, the Playhouse at White Lake needs a stage manager for a show. And they do professional summer stock theater. And I was like, okay, well, hook me up. So I met Cindy Beth Davis-Stigma, who was the manager at the time. She brought me in to stage manage this show. And then a year later, I was the executive director of this 400-seat historic theater at the age of 23.
So you're in your 20s and you're managing this theater. And I imagine when you're talking about an organization like this, it's probably functioning pretty lean, correct?
Well, it's a city-owned theater. So it was owned for a really long time by Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp, which is a fine arts camp in the Muskegon area. It's legendary, great history. They had owned the theater since the 70s or so. They were building a new facility on their own campus and no longer needed the Playhouse for their theater programs. So they had previously sold it to the city of Whitehall for $1. And then the city was like, oh my God, we have a theater. What do we do with it? We own a theater now. So a couple of people had like been the ED before me. So I was the third ED in 3 years, actually. So I came in, was 23, was the only employee, literally did everything it takes to run the theater. So I was doing everything from climbing out on the roof and changing the letters on the marquee to picking the shows that we were going to produce to hiring all of our summer staff to produce these professional, summer stock performances that we would do 8 shows in 8 weeks. Like you put one up, you perform it, you tear it down, you put the next one in and do it all over again. And so I was hiring staff. I was doing all the marketing materials myself. I was running around town, like putting up flyers and posters, in all the surrounding communities, doing budgets, doing fundraising, doing like relationship building, painting hallways and stairs and dressing rooms, like fixing flooding in the basement, like literally everything it takes to run a theater, I had to do by myself.
Well, and I think it's really interesting because currently you kind of naturally get put into leadership roles still. And it feels like everything you're involved with, you kind of end up having some sort of leadership role. So I wonder, like, what kind of intangibles did you learn from that particular job that maybe still helping you in your career today? Because that's a space where you're learning a lot at a very malleable age of your career, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. To be 23 and have that level of responsibility is sort of wild. And it's like, here, just have a theater. And you're like, oh, okay, I have a theater now?
We have this theater for you.
Thank you. I think I had always been a really hard worker, right? It was always like I always worked myself really, really hard, even when I was a teenager, and would always have like multiple activities and things going on and straight A's and like all of that, right? And held myself to a really high standard. I think I learned that you have to work hard to achieve what you want. So to make the theater the best it could be, like if I wasn't there 18 hours a day, it wasn't going to get done. So in order to make that the best it could be for the community, like I had to step up and I had to push through. Not always the healthiest. I'm not saying do that now, but hard work is really important. I think logistics and balance and thinking big picture, but also those very minute details, because you have to have a balance of both, particularly when you're working by yourself. So I tend to, I think, be an integrator more so than anything else, be very detail oriented. But when you are running an organization as a team of one, like you have to have both. So I think finding the balance in that and going like, what is the actual capacity that I have personally or my organization has is really important. So I think I learned that lesson. Communication, like when you are running an organization and you're bringing in people on short-term contracts in particular. So scenic designers, directors, actors, costumers, and they might come in just for one project. Communication is really key, and being very clear about what are your expectations, what are the deliverables, what's the atmosphere that you want to create for this production. Super, super important, because particularly with creative people, all come in, they all have really big personalities and everybody has big ideas. So really being able to like focus in on that and then communicate what is the actual mission and goal and like what do we have to accomplish, I think it was something that I learned pretty quickly. Yeah. And
you were in like a really cool area of the state too. So West Coast of Michigan is always such a good time, and I think a lot of people have a soft spot for the West Coast of Michigan, as they should. It's absolutely beautiful, and we're lucky here in Midland to be able to drive there and have access to it, and still be able to access larger areas. And we've talked about Midland as a location asset, but if we're talking about the locations you were living in at that time, I really respect Muskegon for their community involvement and the way that they really prop their community up and develop those emotional connections between their people and their place. I don't know if Muskegon's always thought of in that vein statewide. I think I get a little bit of it due to my career, and obviously you being from there, you might feel that as well. But can you talk a little bit about that type of involvement and just that type of rallying that goes on in that area? Yeah.
So when we moved there in 1998, the Muskegon Mall was quickly dying. There were like 3 shops left in the mall, and that was in the core of downtown Muskegon. And it was just dead, and it was razed. Like nothing was going to happen. No one was going to revitalize it. So they razed the property. And then all of a sudden there was just this massive tract of land in the middle of our downtown that was just empty. And then there were all these office buildings and other things that had died too, because there was no economic development or investment in downtown Muskegon. And so, then as I grew up and I started getting more involved with the Muskegon Area Community Foundation, I was on their Youth Advisory Council for 4 years, which is a youth philanthropy council, and they take grant dollars and grant them out to youth-focused organizations. I got to watch the Community Foundation go, if we don't do something, like we seem to be the only entity that has the wherewithal to do anything about this problem. I watched them go through that process of determining that and then actually making the investment and rallying the troops around this idea that we have to do something about downtown Muskegon or else the whole community is going to die. So watching that as a high schooler was really fascinating. I got to be around sort of that energy. Went away to college, ended up coming back to Muskegon and working at the Playhouse in Whitehall, which is just north, and watching that development not only of physical land and buildings and rebuilding that downtown, but the civic pride that comes along with it when people have places to spend their time, when they have third places, right? A bar, a restaurant, a coffee shop, art gallery, whatever those third places are, when they have places to go spend their time and money and create relationships with people and make good memories with their families and things like that, they end up loving their community a lot more. And so watching that sort of like economic and physical redevelopment of downtown along with the messaging and sort of like building up of people's love of the community. So they put in this whole campaign of like Love Muskegon. So it's a love with like a heart logo, and that was on coffee mugs and t-shirts everywhere. And people really rallied around that. And then that transitioned, it's still out there, but then that transitioned to Muskegon Watch Us Go. And it's like this whole campaign about Watch Us Go and really harnessing that like energy around like, yeah, we can do this. We can make our community better for everybody through pulling all these different levers and trying all these different things. So to having like been away from the community for a while and going home every once in a while to see my parents and see friends, and just like I was downtown this summer on a Saturday morning, and it was like, I couldn't even have imagined this 6 years ago. So the farmers market was insane. It's so bustling and it's so busy. And they have all of these shops that were open, and people were at the theater, the beautiful Frohenthal Theater, for an event. And there's a new convention center downtown. There's a hockey arena. And it was just, there were so many people. And even 5-6 years ago, I can't even imagine that many people being downtown on a Saturday morning. So to watch that transition over 25 years and what serious and prolonged investment and commitment can do for a community is, I think it's an incredible model and it's an incredible story.
I wasn't familiar with the foreshadowing of the Love Muskegon campaign, actually. I've only been more familiar with their current work, which has been absolutely incredible. So when I think about these type of campaigns, Muskegon is the first one I think about when we look at our state. I think we're fortunate in our region now, as Max Loves Midland has developed. It's been its own specific thing, but that's a little bit different. And Hay Bay City's a little bit different as well. But I think Muskegon has that overarching campaign. And I really like when folks are just willing to say it.
Yeah.
Like, just watch us go. Like, be with us. Take part in this. I love another favorite of mine is I really like the Say Nice Things About Detroit campaign, because it's just it's so kitschy, but it's funny. It's like,
but
it's ours.
Need
Say
a
nice things
cry.
about Detroit.
Yeah,
like,
they need a rallying cry. They need something in common, a common language to build community around. And the Love Muskegon thing, I think, came out of Peter Kageyama. He came in, the community foundation there brought him in for like I think a 2-day sort of like training symposium thing, which I was able to take part in when I was like very young. And I think that idea of like really loving your community and putting your community first in these conversations came out of that. And that's where that whole campaign came from. And it had such legs. Like, I still have a Love Muskegon mug in my house, in my coffee mug cabinet. And I use it all the time. And it just reminds me of the place I'm from is so special. It has its issues, but it is so special because of the history, because of the people who live there, the passions that they have, the community that is built kind of along the lakeshore. It was a great place to grow up.
And you had Shivering Timbers.
Hello, Michigan's Adventure.
Michigan Adventures. You mentioned Kageyama, which is just funny because the books are right behind your head here that he wrote, and he's such a core portion of this initiative and really what this is built on. And even years before Max Loves Midland was conceptualized, the ideas were really existing in our community, and Mayor Maureen Donker really rallied around a lot of those ideals. And then also just our vision statement, it really shows through, and Kageyama is a huge part of what we're doing in Midland right now. So it's very interesting to see that kind of manifest over in your space as well on the west side of the state. So to anybody looking to get a little bit more information about what this show is built on and what this initiative built on, that's a great place to start, is reading some of those Kageyama books. But you continue to give back a lot to your community, and you were working at this small little theater and running it yourself and pulling it all together. But that's definitely not your last stop on your journey before you make it to Midland. And I know you worked at Interlochen as well. So what did your career transition and how did that take place?
Yeah, I was a little burnt out from working at the Playhouse. And she has my heart forever.
Absolutely.
And forever. Like, she is one of the most special theaters. But after working 3 years kind of nonstop, it was like, oh, okay, I need something different. I need to take care of myself. So I ended up going up to Interlochen Center for the Arts up in Traverse City, and got to move to Traverse City and live and work there for 4 years, which is also amazing and beautiful. And if Muskegon comes first, but Traverse City is a really close second. Like, I loved being part of that community as well. And I was the artist relations manager at Interlochen. So I worked for the department that was called Interlochen Presents, which is the arm of the institution that brings in all the guest artists to campus. So they could be coming in for a single performance or be staying for a 2-day kind of workshop residency or a week-long residency working intensely with students. And so I was the person in that part of the organization that would sometimes literally hold the artist's hand through their whole process. Because if you're not familiar with Interlochen, at the campus, it's it's an arts boarding high school during the school year, and then it's a summer camp in the summer, and it is out in the middle of the woods, and the campus end to end is a mile long. And then it has like all these winding trails and cabins, and it's split kind of by a highway, and there's 2 different parts. So it is a overwhelming and isolating place to be if you're not from there or familiar with it. So I would be the person that once a contract was signed, I would do all the contracting, and then once that was signed, it was like, okay, logistics time. So coming up with an itinerary for that artist, like all of their travel, all of their hotel, who are they going to, what are their performance details? What classes are they going to be engaging with? What master classes are they giving? Radio interviews with Interlochen Public Radio. that sort of thing. So I was in charge of scheduling all of that, getting them to campus, and then being their person when they were actually on campus. And it's like, how much hand-holding does somebody, like an adult, really need? But a touring artist...
A lot.
I mean, you don't have to be a touring artist, I think, like need a lot of hand-holding sometimes. But whether you're getting off a tour bus or off of an airplane, you don't have the creature comforts at home when you're on the road, right? So if you're not feeling well, it's not like you can go curl up in your own bed with your favorite blanket and a mug of tea and help you feel better, right? You are in a sterile hotel room. You don't have any of your own stuff with you. So I came to learn that being that person and being that comfort for touring artists was actually a really important part of the job, because in order for them to perform their best or teach their best and give their best to our students in our community, they needed to be well taken care of, because they're humans just like us. Surprise, surprise. So yeah, sometimes it was running them to the pharmacy to get what they needed. Sometimes it was helping them do laundry. Sometimes it was, make like for our more not tech savvy folks, like making sure they had Wi-Fi so they could like do, video calls with their kids back home. There was one night, like I had an artist in a cabin on campus, and he got stung by a bee, and there wasn't a first aid kit, or he couldn't find the first aid kit in the cabin. So he's calling me at 11 o'clock at night. And thankfully I was still on campus, and I was like, okay, swoop and like grab the first aid kit from my office and run out into the middle of the woods in the middle of the night and like help him like with the swelling, like bee sting on his arm. So things like that. So it was a big part of my job. I also did like admin tasks and worked across different departments with marketing and food and beverage and transportation and all that kind of stuff too. But artist relations management, it's a big part of our industry, like the performing arts industry. People don't really talk about or pay attention to, but I learned a ton doing it.
And it's kind of funny. Last year, we had an artist at River Days, and you assisted with the River Days committee and really kind of helping with those artist relations here as well. They had some odd requests, and obviously we would never throw an artist under a bus or say who it was. They were here to perform reggae. But anyways, when I talked to you about this, you very specifically were like, no, I'm used to this. This is the way it is. And I never knew until really right now, like, the scope of what you have dealt with earlier in your career.
Yeah.
So you've been surrounded by all these incredibly talented people, and you're very talented yourself in what you do. But I'm curious, like, who all have you been around that you've got a little starstruck from, maybe in your days in the industry, or just kind of really surprised by, or just taken aback? Maybe starstruck's the wrong word. Not everybody gets starstruck, but that you're like, whoa, that just happened.
Well, let's see. Diana Ross. So one of my last shows I did before I left Interlochen was Diana Ross, and she is just as amazing as you think she is. As a performer, like, she is phenomenal. But her team is very protective of her, and rightfully so. But so it was like, so we started that
Protect the gem.
Yeah. Well, and again, they're on the road. Like, they want very specific things. They have to prep themselves, like, vocally and physically in very specific ways to perform with that level of intensity, right? So it's all understandable. But her team's very protective of her. So like that night, like my interns and I were like backstage doing something, and all of a sudden like the door to her dressing room started to crack open, and we were like, oh my God, run. And we like ran away because we were like, we cannot like lay eyes on Diana Ross.
Whatever you do not make eye contact with Diana.
And it was so funny. And her team was like, no, it's okay. And we were like, no, it's Diana Ross. But actually, her wardrobe director was the kindest person I've actually ever met on a tour. She's a woman that had been in the industry for like 25 years at that point in time, had worked with all of these big stars, managing all of their wardrobe. And she and I had the most interesting conversations. And actually, I injured myself that day. And she kept checking in on me. Are you okay? Are you okay? What do you need? Did you like take care of yourself? You should sit down. You should drink water. And I was actually really grateful that someone who gets it, right? The stresses of sort of like putting on that large scale of a production cared enough about somebody on a local crew to just check in on them and make sure that I was okay, even though I was really there to provide, for them. It kind of came full circle like that, but she was really phenomenal. I once did ZZ Top's laundry. Like, they rolled off the bus and handed me a pillowcase.
Were they suits? Were they all suits?
No.
Oh, man.
It was their casual clothes.
Dang, the dream is dead. I thought they went everywhere wearing suits and twirling guitars.
Button fly jeans.
Okay, that's true. That's
insider
true.
knowledge. They roll off the bus, handed me a couple of pillowcases of dirty laundry, and I had to go do ZZ Top's laundry. So, just the things that you do. What other, who have I got? Michael Feinstein. I don't know if you guys know who Michael Feinstein is. He's a jazz artist. He worked with Ira Gershwin. He was like Ira Gershwin's personal assistant in his later years and is kind of the keeper of the Gershwin legacy. He came and performed at Corson Auditorium, and I think he's the only artist I've ever been sort of tongue-tied with. It was Michael Feinstein. I've met Matthew Morris, and I've met, all sorts of artists, but I think he was the one that I was like a sort of like, okay, pull it
Was
together.
it the name? Did the name, was it Feinstein? Was that it? Or
I think just his legacy and like the type of artist he is and what he has done to preserve the Gershwin legacy. I just really admire him a lot. And he is a great performer too, right? And I was just like, yeah. So I think that's the only one I've ever really gotten like tongue-tied with. Mavis Staples from Detroit, like she came and performed. She was incredible. Gosh, the list, I have lists as long as on my arm. But yeah, it was a really special time. It was intense. Like I would work 60 to 80 hours a week every week, in the summertime. And it was a lot, but it was actually really good. And I loved actually being outside. Like a lot of our venues are outside at Interlochen. So to experience art outside is a very different thing. It's a different animal. So to be able to sort of work inside, outside, and have those variety of experiences was really great.
And Interlochen is just synonymous with huge names across the board. And we could go on and on and on all day. Folks have went to camps. Folks have been there for something. Folks have performed there. And you were, playing one specific role there. But there is all sorts of stuff going on at Interlochen to really uplift art. And it's an important cornerstone of arts within our state even.
It's the state and nationally. And internationally, 25% of the student body during the school year is international. So to have a gem like that is recognized and people are bending over backwards to send their kids there in order so they can receive the best arts training possible, I think is really something we should be proud of. And I don't know that Michiganders really understand that level, right? Blue Lake is great, and like love Blue Lake. It's from my hometown, but like Interlochen is 6 steps above Blue Lake. And so the fact that people really work very hard to send their students there so they can get the best arts education possible. I just don't think we recognize that. Like it's estimated that 25% of all classical symphonic musicians, orchestral musicians today went to Interlochen. Like working in the United States went to Interlochen. That's a quarter of orchestral musicians in the country went to Interlochen. Like that's an incredible track record. They turn out really talented, well-trained students.
So you're up here, you're working at this place, and it's basically the Harvard of art schools. And one day, you probably get offered a job, and you said, my calling is actually to be in the town with the Harvard of Santa schools. I have to come to Midland, Michigan.
I didn't even know about Santa School when I moved here, you guys. That's a story.
A lot of people don't. Like, there will be people listening to this that do not know about Santa School even right now. Yeah. I taught somebody about it this morning, actually, which is really interesting. But how do you get to Midland, of all places? Because when you and I had a conversation, we did your pre-interview, and if you've read it, you saw that Katie said you had friends that were like, you're going to Midland? Isn't like Midland boring? Like, what are we doing in Midland, Michigan? And
especially if you're living in Traverse City, like, because TC is so engaging, right?
Absolutely.
And so alive. And yeah, people are like, really, Midland? And I was like, I think it'll be fine.
Yeah, and this is not to talk down on the place that like we love and we live and we're building community in, but I understand where that perception comes from for sure. So what did your introduction to our community look like, and what did that feel like for you?
Yeah, so I had been to Midland, I think maybe 2 times before actually moving here. So I had a friend from high school, middle school, high school, who lived here, worked for Dow. So I had come over to visit Sarah at some point in time. And then I ended up being the president of the Michigan Presenters Network. Again, it was like, oh, you're the youngest person in the room. Let's just give you a nonprofit to run. So I became the president of that in December of 2016, and wanted to bring back the annual conference for Michigan presenters. It hadn't been done for a handful of years, and it's an important part of that organization is to create networking and professional development opportunities. So was looking around, talking with colleagues. Past president Brian Howe, who's the VP of programming at the Midland Center for the Arts, sort of was like, here's all my institutional knowledge. So I really learned a lot about the organization from Brian and got all the files and what I needed. And he said, let's host the conference in Midland. We can give you the facility for free. Like, I'll help you with the hotel, whatever. So June of 2018, we hosted the Michigan Presenters Conference here at the Midland Center for the Arts. I was here for 2 days. I was like, wow, this is actually a really nice town, beautiful flowers, great parks, like all the things
Badass Tridge, all the good stuff.
The Tridge, H Hotel, stayed at the H, very nice. I was like, oh, this is great. So that was June of 2018. And so met colleagues here. We gathered folks from around the state. And then in December of 2018, I got a random phone call from Brian offering me a job. And it was because of the connections I had made through Michigan Presenters and the hard work I had put into reviving that organization from basically dead to like a very robust organization over the course of that year, that they thought, we want Katie to be our new manager of community engagement, which was a job that didn't exist at the time. They weren't really doing community engagement programming in any sort of like really formalized way. And they wanted to do that. And so they said, do you want a job? And I said, how long do I have to think about it? Because I was actually interviewing for another job at Interlochen at the same time. And I knew I was getting an offer. And so the timing was just kind of serendipitous. But I basically had 3 days from them calling me to like having to make a decision to move to Midland. And obviously we moved to Midland. So yeah, that's how that happened.
And then you were with the Center for the Arts for a few years, and now we're so fortunate to have you at the Midland Area Community Foundation. But something that's been consistent throughout your entire career, and something that I recognize with you here in Midland, is just your community involvement in so many different ways. And there feels like there's a real intersection for you between life, work, personal, art, but then also really working in the spaces of uplifting other community members and making sure everybody feels included. And that is a really special trait to have in a community member, and we could take so many more of them here. What is that calling for you, and why is there such that intersectionality basically throughout your work, throughout your entire career?
I don't know. I think it goes back to my time with the Youth Advisory Council. I think that's when I first got a taste of why it's important to care about your community and why it's important to be engaged in a very deep way. And my parents are incredible examples of that themselves. They are always volunteering. They always encourage us to volunteer. Like, we were always involved with our church and our communities and volunteering at this and volunteering at that and that sort of thing. But I think YAC is where I really got a sense of the wider world and the wider community. And so starting to understand why Muskegon was the way it was. So learning about redlining, for instance, and why Muskegon is segregated as it is, and it still is to this day. Massively. What the socioeconomics of our community, in issues that impacted youth in particular, but thinking about education funding, like we gave $500 classroom grants to individual teachers so they could fund a project in their classroom. And you're sitting there as a 16-year-old going like, why are we giving a teacher $500? Shouldn't this be paid for by the school? Right? And so those questions start turning, and you start interrogating that even as a young person. And I think that's where that really started. And I just think I've always it unlocked something. And then I had an incredible teacher in high school, my government and economics teacher, Steve Sanaki, who really believed and taught me to believe in the power of civic engagement and the power of government, the power that government can have to improve people's lives. It doesn't always, but there is that potential if you do it right and you have the right people in the right spots, in the right places. And so he really influenced me and really taught me about, civics and government and the power of that an individual can have and the collective can have too at the same time. I think those two things really set me up to go to school, to study political science. And again, I got into policy. I don't know. It just sort of it unlocked something in me. And I really deeply care about people. I care about their quality of life. I care about fairness and equity and people having the opportunities that they need to be successful, to thrive, whatever thrive means to them, right? I'm never going to define that for somebody.
Absolutely.
But I want everyone to have what they need to be happy and healthy and raise their kids or support their parents or whatever that is for them, so that they are not constantly worried about where their next paycheck is coming from, or that one medical bill is going to financially ruin them, or that the air that they breathe is going to make them sick. These are the things that I think about all the time. And so I don't know, and I started looking at equity in terms of my performing arts work. And so it's always been woven in there. And I think art's a very powerful tool, to help facilitate those conversations. But yeah, I don't know. It's just sort of it's always been a part of me, and it certainly comes from certain places. But I don't know. I'm a pretty passionate person, and once I lock into something, it's I do it full bore.
Well, and you have a drive to do, and whenever I come across something that I want to get involved in, I think about it and torture myself with the thought for months on end. And I really appreciate folks that just kind of go for it and do it. And one of the things that drives me to continue doing in this community is that vision statement. Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about trying to build a community where everyone thrives, somebody the other day said, "You've said the vision statement so many times on the show already." And I said, and we can never say it enough, that is the story. If the story is always working for the betterment of everyone, we cannot go wrong. And I think that means the betterment of everyone, obviously within the whatever the confines of the box that we're working in at the time. And I don't want that to sound too loaded on the show, but you really go for it and you care about your fellow community members. And what are some of the groups that you've been involved in? And I know you mentioned them at the top of the show, but here in Midland in those spaces.
Yeah. So, the first thing I really did after I came, I think it was pretty soon after I started the center. Some now friends and colleagues from the Midland County Inclusion Alliance came to the center to talk to us about physical accessibility in the building. So they're going around and talking to community institutions about issues of physical accessibility in the space. And I got pulled into that meeting and met them and was like, oh, what is this group doing? Like, what's the mission? What's the passion? What's the vision of it? Like, what are they trying to achieve? So I got pulled pretty quickly into the Inclusion Alliance. As a brand new community member, I think I had fresh eyes in terms of like just looking around and seeing what stuck out to me in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. So I got involved pretty quickly with that. And so I've been the board secretary, and I sort of lead the community arm of that organization. And so it's kind of a partnership between community members and business members of our business community, working in sort of different spaces to do educational programming, training, and public events in our community. So we work in concert with the CAC. We work with DIG, the Diversity Inclusion Group at Northwood University, which is a student inclusion group, particularly focused on athletics, but they needed some support, so we work a lot with the DIG students. And then we've worked with Delta College recently to bring Monica Guzman to our community to have courageous conversations about how to have courageous conversations, which is not always easy. You have to have the tools in order to have a conversation that moves things forward versus sort of like getting stuck in gear. And so we worked with Delta College to bring Monica here and have some really impactful conversations this spring. So we've done a whole wide variety of things. We work with Midland Public Schools in particular, to really support their vision of equitable education for all students and safe and equitable workspace for their staff and administration. So we've partnered with them and we've done teacher training. We've done various projects in the school. We just actually launched our 4th year of the Chromebook sticker project. So we run a sticker contest where student artwork gets turned into a sticker and gets put on 8,000 Chromebooks that go to every single student in the district, plus, student and administration. And that artwork really embodies this vision of like, the theme this year is better together. We're all better together, right? And so we had over 255 entries this year into the contest. So we had to choose 2 winners. So one goes on lower grades, one goes on the upper grade Chromebooks.
That's awesome.
But, it's just supporting, not only creating our own programming, but also supporting the efforts of others and walking alongside and working in concert with versus trying to duplicate efforts, because that doesn't make any sense. But there's so much work to be done. We need so many sets of hands to move this work forward in a variety of spaces. And it's been a huge part of my life since coming to Midland. It's something I was already working in art spaces prior to coming here. But in terms of like launching that and moving into more of a community space, the friends and colleagues I've made through that work have been so influential and so integral to like me becoming a part of this community.
And you guys have done so many incredible things, and there's been so many incredible projects that have been worked on here in this community. And I think every year, one of my favorite things is the Juneteenth celebration now. So I believe this was our 3rd Juneteenth celebration in 2024.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough to at least make an appearance, I think, at all 3 slightly, and I always look forward to it and try and prioritize that as a community member, and I think everyone should. But what has been the impact of that specific event?
Yeah, I think, Juneteenth, the idea actually came from Jan McGuire and Nikita Murray. So they were the co-founders of the event. Were having conversations about like, how do we celebrate this moment in history and give it the attention that it needs and deserves. So 2024, 23, 22. So in 2022, after it became a federally recognized holiday, we had the first ever Juneteenth block party. And so they had this vision of something that's very culturally appropriate to the holiday, that really focuses on the history and just bringing people together in a very community-centered way, just to get together and learn about each other and celebrate and dance and eat and like, no pressure. Just come and be who you are and celebrate this holiday, because it is an important moment in our history that until very recently had no national recognition.
Important memory, or important moment in all of our history, too.
All of our history. It's not just for one part of our country or one particular group, it is something that we all need to know and understand. And so they pulled together the initial committee and said, hey, we want to do this. Will you be a part of it? And I was very honored to be asked to be a part of that effort. And I think they knew I'm really good at logistics. So I was asked to be a part of that. And we planned the first one and we hosted it at Creative 360 at their old location. Now they're on Jefferson, but at their old location. And it really is it's a block party. We provide free food for everybody. It's sponsored. We have a DJ. So we have music. We have crafts and coloring and face painting and dancing and cards and dominoes and lots of spaces for people to just sit and chat and enjoy the nice weather and enjoy the company of their neighbors, right? And so it's very low key, but it's so much fun, and it's for everybody, all generations, all races, all genders. Everyone is welcome to come and commemorate and celebrate that holiday.
It's just pure joy and dancing. And in the first year, my car was actually broke down, and I said, well, I'm not going to be able to make it. It was, it's a Sunday, and we could talk about transportation issues all day if we want. But
Don't get me started.
But we won't get into that today. And I remember prioritizing, I have to make sure I make it over there. So I walked a part of the way, I grabbed a bird scooter and made sure I made it there. And it was so hot that day as well, I think, that first year.
It was warm.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I'm coming over here today. But I'm so happy I did, because if I wouldn't, I would have never realized just how much joy and fun and felt really good supporting that event. So just make sure everyone has an eye out for that next year.
Spaces for people to gather in celebration are so important. I think we used to do it a lot, and then sort of the pandemic happened, and we sort of changed our habits and we changed how we think about community. And so to find a way to bring people together in a really joyful way, I think was really important, and a lot of the heart of what that event is. And we also want it to be meaningful, and we want it to be authentic and come from an authentic place from everybody who's planning it and everyone who attends. We want them to feel the love and the honor for the history and for that moment as well.
Absolutely incredible. So thank you so much for working in those areas and being so involved in assisting us with the Cultural Awareness Coalition as well, and just kind of being all over the space and really having a heart for people, which is just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a community without people, and if you don't take care of your people, then they're not going to be here to make your community. It's sort of like that full circle chicken or the egg thing, right? If you want to have a thriving community, you have to have thriving people. And so you have to take care of them, and that means all sorts of different things. But making sure that people feel like this is their community too has got to be at the top of that list, or else they're not going to stay.
Absolutely. And we're so fortunate to share this community with so many incredible people, and so many people need to be uplifted, and their stories really need to be put on a platform for folks to be able to learn from and understand the lived experiences of Midlanders. And as you continue to live in Midland and experience Midland, and your family structure is rooted here in Midland now, what kind of places are you filling up throughout town, and where can you be spotted at, or what kind of places do you enjoy going to?
Yeah, Center for the Arts. I love theater, and so I love taking in shows. Love going to live music. Chippewa Nature Center is a phenomenal asset in our community. My family and I spend so much time there, particularly during the pandemic. We were out at the Heritage Farm all the time, because it's one of those open spaces that we could be and we could enjoy, and I think they do great programming, and so that's a huge asset in our community.
The kayak launches too. We have an underrated kayak culture in Midland, so that is one of my favorite spaces as well.
We'll have to go kayaking. You haven't taken me kayaking yet,
Absolutely.
Kyle,
We'll have to go.
So Chippewa Nature Center, Live Oak, actually, here, we were right next door to Live Oak. That is literally where I decided to make the move to Midland, was sitting in the front room at Live Oak, crying, because it was such a hard decision. I had to make that decision so fast. And it was, they've cultivated such a beautiful space there. And I literally put coffee shop into my phone, because I didn't know where the heck I was. I put coffee shop in my phone. It brought me here. I sat in that corner with my coffee, crying over this decision. And there were two moms with their kids. They were having a coffee date. The kids were playing. And they kept looking at me, and they're like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I'm fine. I promise." And
borderline happy tears? We're not sure.
And they were so kind. And they talked to me about living in Midland, and assured me that if we came here, there would be resources for us and places to go and people to meet, and we would be welcomed with open arms. And I mean, where else are you going to get that sort of interaction and that sort of care in a random coffee shop? So I love taking meetings here. I love meeting friends and having great conversations here at Live Oak. yeah, and gosh, and I'm always just running around, it feels like. So, my kid plays soccer a little bit, so we're at the soccer complex sometimes. And yeah, Meijer. You can usually find me at Meijer on the weekends.
Yeah, Midland's 2 meeting spaces are Live Oak and now Meijer. You mentioned both, so.
So, although I've learned to order my groceries online, like that's a thing that I'm doing now, and it saves so much time. Why didn't I do that before, Kevin?
I have no idea, but what's funny is when I talk to people that go into Meijer and like shopping at Meijer, and then I'll see groceries at their house and I'll notice it's Walmart. And there's nothing, I'm not trying to start a war between Meijer and Walmart, but I'll ask like, you went to Walmart? Like, I thought you always went to Meijer. They'll usually say, I didn't want to see anyone I work with today, because it's such a thing to like go to Meijer and see everyone you've ever met in Midland.
Yeah, it's true. And so my kid will sometimes be like, Mom, can you please stop talking? Because it's true. You run into everybody that you know. And it's great to have those like aisle conversations. You're like, hey, how's it going? And he's like, come on, let's go. So.
Well, we're so happy to have you here. This is, I think, episode 11 or 12 or 13. I'm not really sure what episode we're on of the Max Loves Midland Show, but I will say you have your own podcast, and you're doing it with a few friends that are scattered throughout the country, and I think your structure of your podcast is really interesting, and niche podcasts are so important to connect with an audience around specific subjects, but I think what's so interesting about your podcast, you've been running over 100 episodes now.
Yeah.
You do it with 4 other people, so these are 5 folks in different places, and you're all recording remotely. So I don't want to, I'm burying the lead here, but what is the name of your show?
We are the There's No Business Like podcast. We are a performing arts industry podcast, and we did just drop episode 103 this week that we're recording the show. So yeah, we're headed into our 2-year anniversary later in October.
With a name like There's No Business Like, it has to be successful, because when you're looking at names of bands throughout history, like nowadays, it's so hard to start a band and come up with an interesting name that is simple. But it's like they used to just be able to call their band like the Police or the Cars. And, if I'm starting a community initiative here in Midland, we're looking around, we're coming up with names like Max Loves Midland, and you have to be able to secure that internet URL. So when I was doing a little bit of research about your show, I thought it was very interesting that I was able to go directly to the URL of there'snobusinesslike.com. So that is a match made in heaven to be able to find a name that simple, but then also bring it forward. So what was the inception of this idea?
Yeah, sure. So if you watch it all during the pandemic, right, restaurant industry and live performing arts were the hardest hit. Because we just couldn't do our thing, right? And even restaurants came back before the live performing arts industry. We were shuttered the longest. And if you look at the economic impact on various industries, live performing arts had the greatest economic impact. And we lost the most employees out of our industry of any industry in the country. And so coming back was really hard because we had to social distance seat and we had to be outside and we had to change everything we knew about providing arts experiences to our patrons. So we had two agent friends of mine had this idea sort of coming into 2022 that like we needed big thoughts, we needed big ideas, we needed discourse around like what comes next, what do we do now? So I get this random phone call from my friend Christine Cox, who's an agent, and she said, "How do you feel about like coming to Fort Lauderdale in 10 days?" And I was like, "Excuse me, what? You want me to go to Fort Lauderdale? Like what for?" And she goes, "Michael and I have this wild idea. Just hear me out." So 10 days later, I was on a plane to Fort Lauderdale, and we got together. They put 5 of us together into this first cohort, and they ran 6 cohorts after that of younger arts professionals that they thought would get along and would have interesting conversations and be able to ask really thoughtful and hard questions about what do we do next. So we're talking about not only return to live performance, but also like staffing, work-life balance, burnout, equity in the field, equitable contracting, pay equity, like all of these different things. And so, yeah, we got together in Fort Lauderdale, of all places. I think it was pretty cheap at the time. And we just talked for 2 days about what had happened and what we saw the future to be. And the 5 of us, I knew Brian and Danielle a little bit. I didn't know Josh and Kevin at all. And the 5 of us just locked in. And we had this spark and we had this magic because we had the same shared passion, the same shared values around the work that we do. And so the conversation just continued after that. And so that would have been February. And in April, we decided, I think we need to do a podcast. And like, so it all sort of came together, but it was just, we were seeing colleagues of ours in particular, young colleagues coming into the field. We had lost so much institutional knowledge. People had just left. Either they couldn't work during the pandemic, so they didn't come back, or they found something better, or they found something with better work-life balance or better pay, and they just didn't come back, or they just decided to retire, take the opportunity to retire. And so it was like, there were some of us left, but then there's this rush of new people in too. And they had no idea how to do their jobs. And it was like everything I had spent 13 years learning, they had to learn in 6 months in order to be effective. And it was like, how do we fix this? How can we contribute to their success? So we thought, well, let's interview our colleagues. Let's catalog the institutional knowledge we still have through interviews and then put it out so that we're just not learning it, but everybody can learn from our very esteemed colleagues that have all this experience and wisdom to share. So yeah, we decided to do it. And so our podcast, like we do a little intro and we sort of like chat about a question of the day. We hear an interview from an industry colleague kind of from all different dimensions of the world. And then we do commentary on the back end and talk about the things that struck us or ask big questions that they raise and discuss sort of the issues of the day. And yeah, and it has led to us being invited to do professional development at industry conferences across the country, create content. And yeah, we dropped episode 103 this week. So yeah, but I'm in Michigan, Danielle's in Virginia, Brian's in Pennsylvania, and then Kevin and Josh are in Illinois. So we do actually span the country, and we're coming in with different experiences and perspectives on things too, which make it really unique and really fun because we like to goof off a lot too. So listen all the way through the outtakes at the very end because it's ridiculous. It's pretty fun.
No, I love talking about local content and heart behind local content. And this isn't even local content. This is national content, but local creators and what folks are doing in those spaces. But I'm really interested in how you bring the show together because today's show, we're here at JNC Media. They do an incredible job. They're recording it on site. It will be edited afterwards. You get a beautiful 4K product when we upload it. It's gorgeous, but all that comes together in the same space.
Yeah.
So how are you bringing together all of these different voices spanning across the country in order to create it? And I know this isn't everyone's bag, but for my media freaks out there, like, it's a cool process.
Yeah. So we use an online recording studio called Riverside FM, which is designed specifically for podcasting. So you can record audio and video or just the audio. We typically do just audio on it. And it's, it functions similarly to Zoom, but it has a better back end in terms of audio quality and the things that you need to then edit the audio for production and for release. And so we've been using that platform since. So, like all of our schedules are pretty wild. And so we each, come up with a list of guests that we want to talk to. And we just reach out and say, hey, would you like to be a guest on the pod? We schedule those interviews individually. And then we find time as a group to meet all 5 of us every single time to record our ins and outs and do that commentary and bring that fun together. But yeah, we just all get together online via Riverside, and I've got a microphone at home and headphones, and then when we go to conferences and we record interviews live and in person, Josh will bring this great setup, and we set up in a hotel room or a loft, and we record. So I actually recorded a few live interviews last week at the Midwest Arts Expo. I was at an industry conference last week with my team, and I recorded interviews with 2 Michigan colleagues while I was there, and so those episodes will be coming up in the next few months. But yeah, so we just make it work.
Absolutely amazing. And if anybody's looking to listen to your show, where can they go again?
Well, the website is nobusinesslike.com, and you can find us on literally every single podcast platform, including YouTube. So just search for There's No Business Like, and it's a blue and kind of salmon color microphone icon and we have different episode art every single week with a photo of the guest. So it's you get a sense of who they are before you listen, which I really sort of love. You get their personality off the bat. And but you can listen to us literally everywhere.
And if somebody wants to just learn a little bit more about the show and not necessarily hop into an episode with a guest, I think you have a trailer out there that folks can check out as well.
Yeah, there's episode 0 is a 12-minute trailer that sort of just introduces us as the host and the concept behind the pod. And you sort of, I think, get a sense. I just re-listened to it recently because I was like,
is it still true?
Is it still true? Are we still doing the thing we set out to do? And we definitely are. But I think even from that just 12 minutes, you really get a sense of like who we are and our friendship. And that's what we hear the most from friends and colleagues. Like my aunt, who's not an arts person at all, listens every single week. And she tells me all the time, like, I love listening to you guys because you can tell you're real friends, right? And you bring the fun and you have genuine conversation and connection. And it has changed my life in so many different ways and helped me grow as a professional and helped me grow in my connection with my colleagues and learning from them. Not only do we talk the business of the business, but we talk career and life and the hard-earned wisdom that our colleagues have, and the life advice that they give is incredible. Like I recently released an episode with a professional dancer from New York who's only 24 years old. And one of the most mind-blowing things she said was, don't tell yourself no before someone else tells you no. And we are all like, oh, yeah, like it would just like, how often do you actually think about things in those terms? So wisdom comes from everywhere. And I think people really love the fact that we dig into sort of like what people wish they would have known, the advice they have to offer others. It's incredibly valuable.
And now our shows, we have our show here with Max Loves Midland.
Yeah.
You have your show with No Business Like. And I feel like everyone has a show all of a sudden. There's podcasts everywhere. If you're an ex-athlete, you have a podcast. If, you used to be on a reality show, you probably have a podcast. Shout out to the Talk to a podcast. If you're a viral meme, you can have a podcast. So,
okay.
I mean, you can just, it feels like everyone's in this podcasting space. And inevitably, this has creeped into everyone's every day, it feels like. So every single day, I feel like I'm listening to podcasts or some sort of content piece. So for this week's draft, we put together a little list of we both brought a list of a few podcasts here. It'll be interesting to see if we have any overlap. I really believe we will not.
I don't think we will. Not at all.
As is customary on the show, I'm going to let you fire it off and go ahead and give me your first pick.
First pick. So this is number one favorite podcast.
Yes.
Okay.
Don't let me steal any of these. So you got to go in case I'm going to go for it.
All right. My number one favorite podcast that I listen to pretty much every single day is Pop Culture Happy Hour from NPR. So I think it's the very first podcast that I remember listening to, and I've been listening to it for 13 years, I think. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It is pop culture, movie, television, music. They talk about all the stuff that's coming out, do critiques of pop culture items. It keeps me in the loop because there's no way I'm going to be able to listen and take everything in. And it's super fun to listen to.
You are not going to believe this. My number one... No, it wasn't that. My number one pick, I'm going with the Dissect podcast. So for all my music fans out there, Dissect is a really interesting podcast that does song-for-song breakdowns of albums, and they're like an hour plus for each song. So it's breakdowns of everything from beats to meaning to lyricism. Traditionally, it's more connected to the hip-hop space. So Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, there's a great season on that. There's an awesome season on My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy by Kanye West. There's a couple Kendrick Lamar albums on there. So you're more lyrically charged hip-hop. Dissect digs into that, and it's really fun for me to just kind of hear a little bit of a meaning behind the poetry. So
nice. All right, number two. Here we go. All right, I'm going to say Work Life with Adam Grant. So organizational psychologist Adam Grant has this really great podcast. I highly recommend everyone listen to it. He has great guests and, again, like great advice for both work and life. That's just, I think, why it's called Work Life.
I need to take a page from your book and start using podcasting. And I think like all my friends that I consider brilliant utilize podcasts for professional development. I do not. So my number two pick is the Bill Simmons podcast. So I think Bill Simmons, I jokingly call him the Podfather, but if you're talking sports media and really looking for alternative ways to do stuff, but really withhold your journalistic integrity along the way while still being entertaining, I think that Bill does it a little bit better than everyone. He originally started Grantland at ESPN before he spun off into his own thing, and the Ringer Podcast Network has become quite the force. So from his own show, he's had so many different spinoffs to the point where I was talking with my partner and she was like, well, I've been listening to this Survivor podcast. It's on the Ringer Network. And then like Bill comes in and does the break-ins for commercials. And I just think it's interesting that podcast networks exist now beyond just a singular podcast.
Totally.
But going with the Bill Simmons podcast, I can't go through a whole episode without mentioning somebody that talks about basketball. So...
I feel like basketball is the theme of the sub theme of Max Loves Midland.
Yeah, I mean, there's like three things we love around here. We love DIY coffee mugs, we like basketball, and we like talking about community. So
I love it.
The Tridge, I mean, I would say the Tridge, but the Tridge falls in the community bucket. So
I don't know. I think the Tridge might deserve its own category.
I mean, the whole song that starts the show every week, it's about the Tridge.
Yeah.
So
which like I've heard the original, I've heard the new version. You can't tell that they're the same song.
Oh no, not at all. It's basically the same thing, and the only time where it really goes up a notch is if you catch me at Decker's like on a Friday night, and I'm in there doing the Tridge song for fun. So, but either way, let's get to number three
I need
for
to
you.
see that with my own two eyes. Okay, number three for me is the Sporkful, which is the food podcast where they talk about food to learn about people.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I like to think of myself as a foodie a little bit, but it's a great mix of food and recipes and history and social science.
So it's like hot ones for people with taste.
Sort of, but there are generally not hot wings involved in that one. But Dan Pashman is a great podcast host. It's a great program.
Absolutely. I'm garbage, so I like hot ones. So
I love hot ones.
So
I mean,
good.
it's great.
So good. Number 3, this is going to be a little bit an older one. I think a lot of people are going to know this one, but what they were able to do with this particular show, and I think I listened to every episode, they really revolutionized the podcasting game. Welcome to Night Vale was such a cool intersection between storytelling and podcasting, and I'm sure it existed before Welcome to Night Vale, but realistically, I remember Welcome to Night Vale being a banner moment in podcasting where things kind of changed a little bit, and it switched just from talk, which primarily are still the ones that you and I are listening to, but it can be so much more.
Yeah.
So.
That's cool. Yeah, that's a great pick. I love that. All right, number 4. All right, I had a tie. I cheated. I have a tie for number 4.
You're okay.
Okay, so this is actually a new one that I've just started listening to probably in the last 3 to 4 months, but I really love it, enjoy it. It's called Life and Art from FT Weekend, tied with Fresh Air with Terry Gross. And it's tied. Fresh Air used to be up there, but Terry's just not hosting as much anymore because she's like moving towards retirement, and I'm obsessed with Terry Gross, and like I had her being a trailblazer in media for women and all of this stuff, but like Terry's just not on as often anymore. So I tied it with Life and Art, but they both bring great content, great commentary. Love them both. So the tie for number 4.
Awesome. I went with more of a niche podcast, something that's a little more personal to me. I'm a huge soccer fan across the board for a few different clubs. One being FC St. Pauli, which is a German soccer club, and it's really hard to find English content about that particular club. Although now that they've been put up into the top flight of German soccer, it's a little easier now. But beforehand, this show is not really airing as much anymore. But Fell in Love with a Girl. It's a married couple from Canada who does a show about the club, and it's just cool when people have such love for something and willing to share that with others. And they were in Detroit when FC St. Pauli visited Detroit City Football Club, which also has fan ownership. So shout out to Detroit City Football Club. So that was really, really cool, and I enjoyed that show a lot.
Cool. Great. Okay. Number 5. All right. So this is they're not actively doing new shows, but the West Wing Weekly podcast. Along with like great history teacher in high school, the West Wing Weekly or the West Wing TV show was airing at that time, and I was obsessed, and we watched it every week, the whole family around the TV, and I've rewatched it. I own the DVDs. That's how big of a nerd I am. And it was a rewatch podcast hosted by actor Joshua Malina and Rishikesh Hirway, and they did a recap of each episode, but actually bring in real policy people that deal with the policy that's in every episode of the show and talk about real life issues alongside the context of the show. Highly recommend. If you're going to listen to one episode of this, go and find the one with Lin-Manuel Miranda and Tommy Kail. So the creator and director of Hamilton, and the parallels between the West Wing and Hamilton, the creative process that they get into about the creation of Hamilton. It is just a masterclass in sort of like how do creative minds work together. So if you're going to listen to anything from that show, just go listen to the Lin-Manuel Miranda and Tommy Kail episode. It's gold.
That's super good. I like the West Wing a lot. I think Sorkin is an
good.
unbelievable writer. The Newsroom is maybe my favorite show of all time. He's absolutely incredible. And I have some Hamilton / West Wing fans in my life that probably have no idea about that crossover and those parallels.
It's so good.
So I will pass it along to them.
Okay, good.
So seeing that you went TV, I just switched my 5th pick. So I had a few down here that could have been number 5. I was going to mention maybe some of the current hip-hop podcasts I listen to pretty frequently. They're pretty red flaggy. The Joe Budden podcast, New Rory and Maul, those type of shows. But as you were talking, right before we started the show, I made another check of my podcast to see what I listened to the most within the last year or so. And I had to laugh at this one a lot because you just did a podcast about a show. So I'm going to do a podcast about a show. And it's a rewatch pod. So I want you to get into your brain and think you're in high school. You're turning on MTV. It's like 9, 8 at night. What might be on? Like,
Real World?
Not Real World.
Okay.
Like all these blonde kids
Daria?
out surfing.
Oh. I did not watch MTV growing up.
Laguna Beach, which I did a rewatch of during the pandemic.
Really?
Back to the Beach podcast with Kristen Cavallari.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
And Stephen Coletti, I think his name is. But as embarrassing that is, you just got to be transparent sometimes. Nostalgia gets to us. Yeah. And this very well easily could have been the Joe Budden podcast, but I went with Back to the Beach, the Laguna Beach rewatch
that is really
podcast. Funny. And shout out to all my people out here that used to be little MTVers. So
I love it. I don't think I've ever seen an episode of Laguna Beach.
Oh, do not watch it. Like I'm not recommending this. This show is not sponsored by Laguna Beach unless you guys want to. 100%. I'm not recommending it as an adult.
I love it.
But it's that nostalgia piece, and we all kind of feed on nostalgia. I know there's a lot of science to that. And yeah, I fall right into that. So I think that comes up on this show a lot, right? Old music, old TV shows. It's just those themes of our life that become building blocks of who we are in terms of pop culture.
Totally.
So we riffed a little bit and added a sixth one, but it's its own category.
It is.
And this was really your idea. So I want you to break it. Like, what are we going for with this one?
We are going for the nerdiest podcast we listen to.
Affectionately. Shout out to the nerds out there. Affectionately.
Yes. Love you. I am one. So
Absolutely.
we wanted to highlight the nerdiest podcast we listen to. So mine is called Away with Words, and it's a language podcast. So it's all about language and the way we use it is their tagline. And it literally, like, people call in and with their language questions about a phrase their grandma used to use or something they heard in a meeting or random things, and these two linguists answer their language questions. And the great thing is that language is always evolving, right? We see all sorts of stuff on social media right now about like Gen Z language. That's an evolution in front of our eyes, and they really dig into that and give historical context for the words we use every day, and is like one of the most soothing things you've ever listened to. So like if you're out gardening or like, you know, just need to like really chill, Away with Words.
So I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here then. Okay. When you were in Wisconsin specifically, were there any words that you heard that you do not hear here? Was there any difference in lingo there?
Yeah, they call drinking fountains bubblers.
Not okay.
Right?
Not okay.
Right? It's like a whole thing, an argument between non-Wisconsinites and everyone else. They call drinking fountains bubblers.
You know, I'm going to keep making the case. Reason number one, we're going to turn you into a Lions fan one day. So Nerdiest Podcast, this show was a very, very original podcast. And I think it might be the first video podcast I ever remember. When Apple first rolled out like the iPod video, they in concert went with video podcasts as well. And I always looked forward to episodes of this specific show. And we are to the point now in history where this is a show that I think did its last episode in 2012, but is coming back now. It's just all about tech, all about Silicon Valley, all about progress in those areas. And, you know, as a 17, 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, I was really, really into all of those subjects. And obviously now we're here doing a show in front of these microphones. So kind of stuck with me. Dig Nation with Kevin Rose and Alex Albrecht. So I'm excited for the comeback. It's going to be huge. You will see them everywhere. It was one of the biggest things. So
cool. Love it.
So that was absolutely amazing. I'm so happy we were able to put together a little list here today and kind of share a little bit of our deep, dark potting secrets. And I was happy to have you on as a professional. I just want to real quick, something we didn't really touch on, but we got to a little bit of that space. Now that you are working at the Community Foundation, we very intentionally do this show where we talk about the person that's on and not necessarily the work that's going on. You know, obviously that comes through naturally on the show with me working at the Community Foundation as well. And I think that we have the opportunity to do so many incredible things and be witness to so many incredible things. But your journey starting off in the Youth Advisory Council space in Muskegon to now working at the Community Foundation here in Midland, just real quick, what is your observation of community foundations and the role that they play within a community?
Well, I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but like the attention that they can pull or how they can actively respond to the needs of a community, I think is the most special thing about the Community Foundation model. Because like I said earlier, like my community foundation at home, we're the ones that stepped up to help save downtown Muskegon, right? Which is the core of that community. Here in Midland, I've seen, you know, coming here and like they already have all these community initiatives. So you have the Cultural Awareness Coalition, which is long-standing. It's been around for like almost 40 years. Public Arts Midland. There was no public arts kind of space, right? Nobody really doing that active work. And the foundation said, we'll be the backbone for that. And there's lots of other things. And I think watching Sharon Mortensen work and watching Alicia Christie work, watch you work, learning about how Max really came to be. I've been involved with Max for a little while, but like learning sort of the real origin story of that, it like really strikes me that I think community foundations are one of the models that are best well positioned to meet the needs of a community in a really flexible and responsive way. Structure sometimes holds us back, and people's just natural inability or to be flexible because we need structure, we need regularity, we need to understand the world around us. Sometimes holds us back. I think foundations are flexible enough that they can do what needs to be done to support a community and support the work of others too, right? Again, not reinventing the wheel, not duplicating efforts, but putting resources, time, people, money into spaces to support the work of others too. And I think that what makes them really special.
I love that answer. And the best thing about a community foundation, and a really interesting thing about a community foundation, is we fit in so many different categories and wear so many hats for different people. So some people will tell you grant making, some people will tell you scholarships, some people will tell you our work within initiatives like the Santa House or River Days, or the Cultural Awareness Coalition, Public Arts Midland, access to recreation or access to community now. Yeah. We can go on and on and on and on. And being able to work with incredible people that help bring this to life. And I don't just mean the people within our office, I also mean the people involved with us. And we just had a very, very, very successful neighboring week, which we had Wally on the show here. Talk Midland with Logan. He did some great stuff on here. I know he records also here at JNC Media, so I want to shout out to that show as well for doing coverage on Neighboring Week. But just the energy this year around Neighboring Week, I have been in absolute awe of every single day. It's unbelievable.
It has been unbelievable. We've been to a handful of events this week as our schedule allowed, and the energy around it and the yard signs this year, like they were a hot commodity. We got rid of 250 of those things lickety split.
I want to brag about my coworker Katie real quick. She brought a bunch of yard signs for neighboring up into Coleman, and I just think it's really, really important for everyone in the county to understand that they have a seat at the tables that are here within the city of Midland when we are working on these county-wide initiatives, specifically stuff like Midland County Neighboring Week. So I want to give you a little bit of recognition on that. I know you didn't do it for recognition, but the impact that has is so big. And again, it just harkens back to you understanding that when you reach out to people, good things happen.
Well, showing up is the most important thing we can do for our neighbors, whether that's showing up at a meeting, showing up at a Neighboring Week event, showing up for someone who's having a hard time, personally, professionally, whatever that is. Showing up is the biggest thing. And people only learn to trust you when you show up consistently as well. So working in all parts of the community, showing up is the first step and the biggest step. So happy to do that. And I don't know, this place is, as much as I was like, I think it's going to be fine when we moved here. I think it's going to be okay. I have learned to love it, and I have learned to really appreciate everything that it has to offer. And I think this is like a really great community, and it still has so much potential, like undiscovered potential that we are still figuring out both locally and regionally. And I'm so excited to see where it goes.
And as a last little piece of advice to our audience here, as I said earlier, I'm a thinker. So like when it comes to brainstorming something, I'll sit in it. And I think that you are a doer and you really go after things. So do you have any advice for anybody who might be listening to the show right now and thinking for ways to get involved and looking for ways to get involved in the community or watching the show as well?
I think if you're really passionate about something and you want to get involved, you want to volunteer, you want to show up in some way, shape, or form, you just have to pick up the phone or send an email. Like, it is really that simple, because every initiative, every nonprofit, every group in this community needs more hands, and they are going to welcome you with open arms. So if you're nervous about just taking that first step and saying like, I want to be a part of this, I guarantee you no one is going to tell you no. And they're going to be so excited that you are excited about what they're excited about, because passion is contagious. And so if you're thinking about it and you're sort of like, I'm not really sure, just take that first step, or say to a friend like, hey, do you want to do this with me, and go do it together, right? But just showing up, saying yes, that first step is going to open up a whole world to you. And quite honestly, I think biggest lesson from my career is you only get out of something what you put into it. So if you want more from your community, you have to pour into your community. So if you want to be here and you want to be happy and you want to thrive, you have to be part of the solution too.
Well, we appreciate you showing up every single day and appreciate you showing up in Midland. And thank you so much for being on the Max Loves Midland Show.
Thanks, Kevin.
And thank you all for showing up for the Max Loves Midland Show again this week. What an incredible week. So we're filming this right now during Neighboring Week. And when this finally airs, Neighboring Week will be all wrapped up. But I hope you have some great memories from this week. So much good press going on and so much good energy. And all those events were posted right on the maxlovesmidland.com calendar. So make sure you are posting your events on the community calendar. You're utilizing that. With over 2,500 events, it is quickly becoming an integral portion of this community for people to meet one another and be able to share space with one another. And we couldn't do it without the participation of everyone across the board. So we appreciate you showing up and watching or listening today. We appreciate you throwing those events on the calendar. And we just appreciate you being you. And as we always say at the end of every single show, when life gives you a bridge and it doesn't do the job, build a tridge. Thank you again.
subscribe wherever you consume media. Max Loves Midland is your entertainment, resources, and collective improvement hub for Midland County. Plan your next adventure in Midland at maxlovesmidland.com.